Normally, during this time of year, I normally have about 3 or 4 tax audits going at any one time. At any one time, I normally have about 3 or 4. I now have 28. Every single one of them is somebody who owns rental property or is a real estate agent. How many of you here own rental property? Just 1 or 2 or more. How many of you own rental property? All right. The IRS hired 5,000 new auditors. They call them tax compliance officers. They're the ones that are auditing the rental properties. And the IRS is putting on a 5-year push. And within 5 years, beginning in 2008, they figure that in 5 years they can audit every one of you that has rental properties. Every single one of you. What are they looking for? They're looking mainly for depreciation and to see that you're charging fair rent and that you're not renting to relatives. Now, I know none of you would ever rent to a relative. None of my clients would ever do that. I don't want to know that. What they're looking for is the correct amount of depreciation. I hope you guys turn your phones off, okay? Listen up and you're going to learn something. So get your heads out of your phones and no texting. If I see you texting, I'll just stop talking until we're done with you because I don't want to be rude and interrupt you while you're texting, okay? So, what they're looking for is people who are not taking the proper amount of depreciation. What happens is when you have a piece of rental property and you go in and have your tax return done and you hand the tax preparer your HUD 1, if the tax preparer does not ask for your property tax bill, your depreciation is wrong. It cannot be right. Only the property tax bill will give the accountant the proper amount of depreciation. So you think about this. Did your tax preparer ask you for your property tax bill? If he didn't, your depreciation is wrong. And I promise you, 90% of you, your depreciation is wrong. That's why the IRS is coming after people that have rental properties. You go and you have your tax return done, and you say, you have a single family home, you say I spent $4,000 in repairs. No! Maybe part of it was repairs, but the rest of it was capital improvements. A bathroom remodel, concrete work, carpentry work. That has to be capitalized. You can't write that all off at one time. You put on a new roof. That roof has to be written off over 27.5 years. There's rules on that. That's what the IRS is looking at. So you think about your own tax return here. When you think about your return, how did that do? Did you put $4,000 or $5,000 in repairs on one piece of property? That's what they're asking for. That's what they're looking for in the audits. Let's say a water heater. A water heater you can't write off all at one time. It's got a 10-year guarantee. It's got to be written off over 10 years. People say, well, that's not fair. Where's fair? Pomona. You want fair, you go to Pomona. This is tax law. Got nothing to do with what's fair. These are the rules, and this is why the IRS is auditing your tax returns. Now you look at that blue sheet, and it's very explicit. If you're audited, you need to make sure that your tax preparer is either an enrolled agent like I am or a CPA. Nobody else but those two credentials can represent you at the IRS. Nobody else. Only 10% of all the practitioners are licensed to represent you. Only 10% of all practitioners are enrolled agents, which is what I am, or a CPA. That means you got a 90% chance that your tax preparer is not licensed to represent you. And God forbid, you don't want to go on your own. I never take my client with me on a tax audit. Never. God forbid they'd open their mouth and say something. Then I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes explaining why they said what they said because they really didn't mean it. So my clients never see the place. My clients never talk to the IRS. Don't have to. These are things that you want to remember. You're professionals. Deal with professionals. If you deal with H&R Block, you got what you deserved. They're not professionals. After April 15th, they go back to Nordstrom's and selling shoes or something, or pay less. Okay? Or maybe being a mechanic. You're a professional. Deal with the professionals. There's a lot of us out there that specialize in what you do. And that's what I do. I specialize in what you do. I handle tax audits. If you got levies or collections or garnishments or the IRS is after you, let's say you haven't filed all your tax returns. I know they find that hard to believe. If I get 10 people in my office that haven't filed tax returns for the last 3 or 4 years, 8 of them are real estate agents. Go figure. What would happen if you had a client that wanted to buy a piece of property and you say, I need the last 2 years of your tax returns, and the guy said, I haven't filed? You can't help them, can you? You got to tell them, hey, you got to go file these tax returns. Now we can look at something. Or let's say he owes the IRS a whole bunch of money. Let's say he owes the IRS $40,000, $50,000. He can't borrow his way out of a bubblegum machine. Let's get these tax returns done. I do late tax returns. I promise you, in this group of about 80 to 100 people, I guarantee there's about 20 of you haven't even filed your 2010 tax return. Probably more than that. And it's due October 15th. Your extensions are up October 15th. And you guys know who you are. You know who you are, you haven't filed. And I guarantee you, there's a half a dozen of you that haven't even filed the last 2 or 3 years. You know who you are. Let's get them done. Call me up, make an appointment, let's get in to get these tax returns done. I do late tax returns, I do them all the time. It's not a big deal. The problem is, if you owe money, the penalties are horrendous. More than likely, let's say you're 2 years behind, the penalties are going to be about 30% of your total tax liability. The IRS is going to get your attention. Not only that, let's say you haven't filed in 2 or 3 years. The IRS is going to file a return for you. And they're going to send you a bill. I had a client in the other day. No, he's not here. I had a client the other day, came in, and the IRS said he owed $150,000. Well, he'd sold a piece of property, didn't file a return. The property sold for $300,000. They don't know what it cost, so they bill him on a $300,000. He also had a 1099 for about $80,000, so he owed $150,000. Well, when we got done with his return, with penalties and interest, he owed $19,000. These are attention getters. They're telling you something. I mean, who would want one of those letters from the IRS that says it looks like you owe, you know, the national war debt? It's an attention getter. That's what gets people in my office. I love it. Because all of a sudden you say, holy mackerel, I got to get these tax returns done. So let's get these tax returns done. October 15th is coming up, and I'd be very glad to help you. Okay, the yellow sheet. How many of you are aware of this AB 458? How many of you are aware of that? You've had somebody talk to you about it, you know a little bit about it? I don't think it's as good as what it says. I think it's going to be a real problem. Let me tell you the reality of this thing. First of all, this Assembly Bill 458 was passed July 15th. It is not retroactive. It only takes care of transactions July 15th forward. It does not go backwards. Why they didn't make it retroactive? I don't know. They didn't call me and ask me my opinion, or maybe they did and I was out fishing or doing something important. I didn't get to tell them what I thought. But we're stuck with this. What it says is that if your client sells 4 residential units or less, 4 residential units or less, and there is a written agreement for a short sale. Now, what I'm telling you, there's no ifs, maybes, could-bes, or howevers. This is the rule. If it is a written agreement short sale with the bank, and the bank agrees to the short sale, and it's 4 units or less, this does not mean 4.5, 4 units or less, the bank has no recourse against you or your client. Whether it's a refinance, whether it's a second or a third trust deed. Now, what's going to happen here is that let's say there's a junior loan or a second trust deed on this property, and the lender agrees to a short sale on the first. That automatically includes the second. Whether the second trust deed holder likes it or not, they're stuck. I wouldn't want to be the second trust deed holder. I'd be upset. Okay? So that's what's going to happen. Now, look what's wrong with this. If the bank gives you and your client a written agreement on a short sale, the bank cannot come after your client for any bit of that money, and there are no tax consequences. That does not mean your client's not going to get a 1099-C for cancellation of debt. because it has to be handled properly. You know, on the 1099-C, it doesn't say whether it's a single unit or 15 units. It just says this is a debt forgiveness. The debt forgiveness is X amount of dollars. It has to be shown properly on your tax return. And like I tell people, this is not an H&R Block transaction. You need to have somebody that really knows what they're doing to handle this so that you don't pay the tax liability on it. Now, if I was the bank, would I go ahead and give somebody a written agreement for a short sale? No. Why would I do that? I can't go after them. I'm going to tell you something. You're going to see a lot fewer short sales. Why would the bank want to sign an agreement to a short sale? Why would they just say, we're not going to give you this short sale? You can just let it go to foreclosure, because then the bank has full recourse. You see what's going on here? This is not as good as what we think it is. When it first came out with it, oh man, this is great. These people are going to get out of paying all this tax liability on these 3 or 4 units. Let's say that it's 4 units in the back and the house is in front that they live in. That's not going to qualify. It's all 1 unit. It's 5 units. So you got to be careful of this. There's some real problems with this. The biggest problem that I see is the banks are not going to be so quick to give you a short sale. They're not going to be so quick to do it. And a short sale is a good thing, because a short sale is much better on your credit, isn't it? Short sale doesn't need your credit like a foreclosure. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of short sales on investment properties. Now, we're talking about one specific type of real estate. This is personal residence. Bush already passed a law 4 years ago that precludes a personal residence from any tax liability on a short sale or foreclosure. We're talking about investment property, one of these. And the two don't mix. And we're talking about 4 units or less. 4 units or less. That's what the law says. So if your client sold 4 units and you sold them and they closed on a short sale, they closed on a short sale for, let's say, July 1st, they got tax problems. They got recourse problems. The bank can come after them, and they're going to have some real serious tax problems. You know, agents call my office all the time, and I know you guys do too, and I appreciate that. And they say, hey, I got a client going in for a short sale. First thing I want to know is the primary residence. If it's primary residence, it's a no-brainer. They don't have a problem. They have no tax problem. They have no debt forgiveness problem. They almost never have a problem if it's this one, okay? If it's one of these, and I'm telling you this includes the vacation home, includes the home mom and dad are living in, the home the kids are living in, the rental home. It's one of these. There will definitely be a tax issue. It may be a tax loss, and it could be a debt forgiveness at the same time. Let's say that they paid $400,000 for the piece of property, and it wound up short selling or foreclosing for $300,000. They have a $100,000 tax loss, but they also have a debt forgiveness of $150,000. That $150,000 is taxable, but the loss is deductible, so they wind up with a net gain of $50,000. That's because it's one of these. There will always be some kind of a tax problem with one of these. Now, if it's 4 units or less, they won't have a tax problem. But if it's more than that, there is going to be a tax issue. Now, I'm not trying to teach you tax law. What I want you to be is smart enough to recognize a problem and don't ignore it. Have your clients call me, or you call me for your client. I know a lot of you do call me, and I appreciate that, and I always take your call. I may have to call you back, but if you don't hear from me in 24 hours, you got to call me back again. That means I didn't get the message. I carry my cell phone with me just like you do, and I always take my calls. If I'm out of the office, I check my message to see who's looking for me. So I'm always available to handle your questions. You know what you can do for your clients? Tell your client that you're going to pay for the phone call. They don't know I'm not going to charge you. It looks good for everybody. Say, hey, just tell Earl Hoop my name, and he'll send me a bill for the phone call, and he'll answer all your questions. They don't know I'm not going to charge you. It's a good thing for everybody. Because I figured if they had somebody smarter than me, they wouldn't be calling me. So I pick up business that way. That's how I build my practices in these seminars and these talks, because I'm available to handle questions for you. And I don't have to say, well, I'll call you back tomorrow and I'll give you the answer. I don't have to do that. I haven't been in this long enough. I probably know the answer. I've been at it long enough and I've had enough little problems. So it's like when you call your attorney and say, well, I'm sorry, he's busy, he'll call you back in 3 days. Hell, in 3 days I could be dead. I got the problem now. I got the question now. Now's when I want the answer. I will try to take your call as soon as possible, because maybe you got your client sitting at your desk and you want the answer right then. And I'll do my best to take your call. Even during tax season, which is from 1st of February till April 15th. I will take your calls then too. I may not be able to talk to you right then, but I promise you I will call you back that day, like a lot of you have done. A lot of you are clients of mine, and I appreciate that. But these tax issues that these people have sometimes can really be horrendous. I had a client call me yesterday. It was yesterday, Friday. She wants to sell a house, and her daughter said it's worth about $500,000. They told me where it was, a small 3-bedroom in Lakewood. It's probably worth $250,000. So and this guy wants to pay her house off, sell the house, and give her daughter $200,000. I said, hey, well, what happened? I said, after you take the $70,000 out that you want, and the $50,000 out for taxes, and the $15,000 for selling costs, you might have $100,000 left. When you have these questions, call me and talk to me. And I'll help you do a net sheet real quick. Figure out what the tax liabilities are. Now, one thing you want to tell your clients, if they're going to be selling properties this year, or they're thinking about selling, and there's going to be a capital gain because it's one of these, okay? One of these. Taxes are going up next year. As part of the Obama package, they made a deal with the Republicans and Bush. They said they would not raise taxes last year, 2 years ago, but that's changed because they said that the taxes will go up in 2012. Capital gain is going to go from 15%, which is what it is now, to 20%. State of California is going to go from 9.3 to 11.6. So if you've got somebody who's looking at selling property, and they are thinking that maybe should they sell this year or next year, this is the year they want to sell if they're going to have a capital gain. Because taxes are definitely going to go up next year. So in this particular situation where this client called me, I says, why don't we do this? Why don't we go ahead and do an exchange on the property? The daughter wanted to move to Pennsylvania. She wanted to give the daughter the house. Why don't we go ahead and sell the property, do an exchange, a 1031 exchange, and then let her live in it, and then she'll refinance it, pay cash for it, refinance it, and give you the $70,000 cash that you need to pay off your house. Now the daughter's got a payment on $70,000 and just save $50,000 in taxes. Then, after 3 years, deed it over to the daughter. These are the kind of things that I can work out with you to help your client not pay taxes if they don't have to. At least come in and talk to me. If you got a client that's got a big capital gain, they're going to sell some property that they bought a long time ago. You know what's typical is they bought a house 30 years ago that the whole family lived in, and then they decided they needed a house that big, so they moved out and they rented it for the last 10 or 15 years. And the basis is real low because they only paid $50,000 for the house 30 years ago. Now it's worth maybe $500,000 or $600,000. That gain is taxable. That gain might cost them $150,000. Let's figure out how you can sell the house, make your commission, and maybe have the taxpayer, your client, pay no taxes. Give me a shot at it. Let me make some suggestions to you to help you sell these properties. You know, this is what makes a good agent. Having a well-rounded knowledge of how to help your client sell the property and not pay taxes. Isn't that would be great? Not have to pay any taxes and realize all the money and the profit? Well, it can be done. But you need to call and talk to me. If you're going to send your client into my office about a tax issue on a piece of property, come with your client. You'll learn too. I don't charge anything for telephone calls, but I do charge for office time. I charge $175 an hour. I had a client, I had a real estate agent or a client call me and say, I heard the first visit was complimentary. That term isn't even my vocabulary. I don't even know how to spell it. And I don't want to know how to spell it. I said, why don't you ask those ladies working out there in the secretariat pool if they're going to work the next 3 hours complimentary? Or maybe the telephone company, I heard next month's bill is complimentary. Give me a break. This is all I have to sell, is my knowledge and be able to help people sell properties and not pay the taxes on it. I had a situation with a client, and I've talked to a lot of you. I know there's some people here that haven't seen me before, but I had clients come into the office, and they were really distraught because mom and dad are going to have to pay all the taxes on the home they've lived in for the last 30 years. Let me tell you what they did. This is a real good lesson. I'm going to tell you, first of all, do not let your clients put their kids on title to their property unless they're really pissed off at the kid and they want to get even with them. Then they put the kid on title, and then when the kid sells the property, he takes a hammer on all the taxes. Now you got back at him. But if you don't want to do that to your kid, don't put him on title. Mom and dad got real sick. And they said, you know, we don't think we're going to be around long, and so they talked to the mailman or the garbage collector who knows all this stuff and told them to put the kids on title. So they put the daughter on title. Mom and dad still live in this house. About 3 years later, now the house is in the daughter's name. About 3 years later, 2 years later, mom and dad are feeling great, and about 4 years later, they say, you know, we want to sell this house and we want to move to a nice retirement home. They only paid $15,000 for the house umpteen years ago, and now it's worth about $500,000. Guess what just happened? They lost a $500,000 exclusion because they haven't owned it for the last 3 years. It's been in the daughter's name. What should they have done? Set up a trust. Set up a trust. This is the kind of thing that you need to know about to help your clients. Don't let them put their kids on title. And I promise you, there are a lot of you here today that know some of your clients that have put their kids on title. Maybe some of you have done that. For whatever the reason, I have no idea who told you to do that. But you set up a trust. And then the property passes to the beneficiaries. And they get a stepped-up basis. A stepped-up basis means a fresh start in value when they die. So somebody says, well, gee, I inherited a piece of property from my mom and dad. Is when they died. Well, they didn't die yet. You can only inherit from somebody who died. If they didn't die, it's a gift. And a gift does not get a new basis. A gift is, so mom and dad paid $15,000 for the house 45 years ago, and they give it over to the kid. The kid's basis is $15,000. The house is worth $500,000. Kid sells the house, going to pay the taxes on the difference. Let's say it went to the trust. Mom and dad died. Went to the trust. The house is worth $500,000. Only one child inherits the property. Sells for $510,000. Pays taxes on $10,000. You see the difference here? Don't let your clients put your kids on title. Have them set up a trust. Trusts are not that expensive. I remember my old man, he was a stubborn old fart. I mean, he's, I don't need no stinking trust. Okay, so my sister and I went out, and we had a trust drawn up a long time ago, and it cost us like $750 for a trust. We shared it. It saved us both about $200,000 when mom and dad finally passed away. These are things you need to do for your family and your clients. And I can't tell you how many times I see people come in here into my office and they say, you know, I had this property and mom and dad put it in my name because they weren't feeling good, thought they were they're getting ready to pass away, and so they put the property in my name. I said, who told you to do that? You know? Be careful of this kind of stuff, because I see it all the time. I see it all the time. Any questions about anything I've talked about this morning? I know I talk fast. I give you a lot of information, but I raised a house full of kids, and I learned real quick, if you don't talk fast, nobody's going to listen. It's only borderline anyway. Yes, sir.
For a question about the July 15th, is that an approval on that day or after, or is that a closing?
It has to close by July 15th or after in order for them to take that those units, 4 units or less. It has to have closed July 15th or after. If it closes on July 14th, you know, whenever you get a 1099-C, it says the date of the short sale. If that short sale is July 14th, your client loses. Okay? That's how critical. Why do they come up with these dates? I have no idea where they come up with these dates, because they've been kicking this rule around for the last 6 months. That was not the day that they finally passed it. They passed it about a month before that. So why they come up with these dates, I have no idea, but it's what there is, and that's what we have to deal with. And the state of California has the same rules. It's Assembly Bill 580E. It is the same rule. The state of California says we're going to do the same thing the feds are. This has been the first time in a long time. Usually the state's about a year later because they got a better idea. Why would anybody want to be governor of this state? You know how big his ego has to be? I mean, whatever he does is not going to make everybody happy. I would not want that job. I mean, Meg Whitman ought to be glad that she didn't win. Well, it was a nightmare to be in charge of this state with all the problems we got. I mean, if he raises taxes, everybody's upset. If he doesn't raise taxes, the state goes bankrupt. What do you do? How would you like to make a choice like that? Oh my God, it'd be horrible. Yes, ma'am.
Question, does this 458 apply to single-family residence that's your primary residence?
Okay, the rule for primary residence has not changed. The only rule, this 580E and Assembly Bill 458 for the federal government, only pertains to investment property. The other code section is section 121, and that's been around a long time. And 4 years ago, when Bush was in office, he made a rule that personal residence, if it's foreclosed on or short sale, the gains are not taxable. It took the state of California a year later to come in line with that. So we had tax liabilities with the state and no tax liabilities with the federal. Well, this time the state has gone along with the federal on these 4 units or less. And this is too new. I haven't seen anything yet. We're not doing tax returns on this yet. But it's going to be kind of interesting to see what's going on. I think the 4 units or less came in line with FHA financing. Isn't that 5 units or less to get a good deal on FHA, something like that? Isn't that 4 units? I think that's where the 4 units came from, is because that was the FHA rules, and I think that's why the government decided that that was a good number. It was been there and good enough for FHA, it's good enough for the federal government on these rules. So that's where the 4 units came from. Thank you. Yes.
When you buy a house and you have a tax basis, if it's refinanced, it stays at the original?
Yes, and that's a very good question, Mike. I get this asked a lot. Let's say somebody paid $400,000 for a piece of property and they refinanced it, and the property value went up to $800,000, and they refinanced, still got a whole bunch of money. Basis is still $400,000. The loans and the mortgages on a piece of property have nothing to do with the gain. Nothing to do with the gain. So an agent calls me up and says, well, my clients got rid of this property and they sold it, and the mortgage was this. I said, I don't want to know what the mortgage is. I want to know what it sold for. What they paid for it plus improvements, minus what they sold it for, minus closing costs, that's the gain. The mortgages don't mean anything when it comes to do with the gain. The only time the mortgages come into play is when it's cancellation of debt. And your client will always get a 1099-C. And this becomes a problem. You all know what the 1099-C is, right? You know that's the debt forgiveness thing that the banks and lenders send out. Let's say your client doesn't get one. And I had an audit. A client sold a bunch of property, and he knew what the bank sold it for, but he didn't have a closing statement because it was a foreclosure. Didn't have HUD 1. It was foreclosure. So all you got to do is run a property profile. You got the program here. You run a property profile for your client. It not only shows what it sold for, it shows when he bought it and when he paid for it. It shows the exact date the property sold, and it says it's got the selling price on it. That's the kind of thing you may have to do for your client because they didn't get a 1099-C. Why? They moved. They don't live in that house anymore. Do you think they called up the bank and says, hey, let me tell you where we moved to, you can send us our 1099-C? No, they're not going to do that. So you need to be able to help your client, and it just takes you a couple of minutes to pull up that property profile or property analysis. That's what you need to be able to do. Because if it's a short sale, then we're going to see a HUD-1, because everybody's in agreement. But we're not going to see a lot of short sales now, and I think you're going to really be surprised that all of a sudden these banks are going to say, we're not going to sign a short sale agreement.